I came home to find my palace burning and my guards scattered, and my children's door held by the one person in the whole palace I had never once thought about, a human servant whose name, to my shame, I had to ask, standing in the smoke, while he stood between my children and the people who had come to kill them. I am Queen Sareth of the Ilvane, and I am going to tell you the most important thing that ever happened to me, and it is not a thing I am proud to tell, because it begins with my own blindness. It begins with a queen who did not know the name of the man who saved her children's lives, because he was a servant, and servants were beneath my notice, and I had walked past him 1,000 times and never once seen him, until the day everything I valued was on fire, and the only thing standing between my children and death was the one person I had never valued at all. His name was Caleb. I know it now. I will never forget it now. But on the day the palace fell, I did not know it, and the not knowing is the beginning of my shame and the beginning of the only story I have ever truly needed to tell. Let me tell you what happened. Let me tell you about the coup and the burning, and the human servant who would not move from my children's door, and what it taught a queen about who, in the end, actually loves you, and how rarely it is the ones you'd expect. You have to understand the Ilvane court first, and my place in it, and how I saw the world before that day, because the seeing is the thing that had to break. The Ilvane were an old royal people, and our court was a vast and rigid thing, ordered by rank above all else. Everyone in the palace had a place, and the places were arranged in a strict and ancient hierarchy, from the royal house at the summit down through the nobles and the officials and the high guard and the skilled servants, and at the very bottom, the menial servants, the ones who cleaned and carried and tended, who were considered so far beneath the notice of the high that they were almost furniture, present everywhere and seen nowhere, the invisible hands that kept the palace running. I want to show you what that hierarchy actually felt like, lived in, because the showing is the only way you'll understand how deep my blindness went. In the Ilvane court, your rank determined whether you existed. That is not an exaggeration. The high did not see the low not as cruelty, but as a kind of trained blindness, a thing bred into us across 1,000 years of court life. When I walked a corridor, the nobles bowed and I saw them. The high guard saluted and I saw them. The skilled servants stepped aside with their eyes lowered and I noted them vaguely, the way you note a piece of useful furniture. And the menial servants, the cleaners, the carriers, the nursery tenders, the invisible hands, simply did not register at all. They were trained to press themselves to the walls when the high passed, to become as unobtrusive as possible, to be not there. And we were trained, in turn, to not see them. And the two trainings met in the middle and produced a whole class of people who lived and worked in my palace and were, to me, functionally invisible. I could walk the same corridor every day for years, and pass the same menial servant every day for years, and never once see his face, never once learn his name, never once register that he was a person at all. This was not a thing I was ashamed of. That is the part that shames me now. I did not think of it as a flaw. I thought of it as the natural order, the way the world was arranged, worth running downward from the throne and thinning as it went until, at the bottom, it ran out entirely and you reached people who simply did not matter. I believed, the way you believe the things you have never had cause to question, that the high were the worthy ones. That loyalty and courage and honor and love were the province of noble blood, refined and concentrated at the top, and that the lower you went the less of those things you would find, until at the bottom rung there was nothing but hands, useful hands, attached to people of no particular worth. I was wrong about that. I was as wrong about that as it is possible to be. And I learned how wrong in the worst possible way, in the smoke at a door, from a man I had never seen. Humans were new to the Ilvane court, and they had entered it mostly at the bottom. A few humans had come into Ilvane service in the lowest positions, menial servants, the invisible kind, because humanity was young and unimportant in our region, and a human could not expect to enter an old proud court any higher than the bottom rung. I had a handful of them in my palace, these human servants, and I had never thought about them at all, because thinking about menial servants was simply not a thing a queen did. They were beneath my notice in the most literal sense. My notice did not extend that far down. I could not have told you their names, their faces, anything about them. They were part of the furniture of my life, the invisible hands, and I walked past them every day and never saw them. I had heard things about humans, the way one hears things, the court gossip, the traitors' tales. That humans were strange, that they did not understand rank the way we did, that they treated everyone more or less the same regardless of station, which the Ilvane found bizarre and a little improper. That a human servant would look you in the eye, actually meet your gaze, which no Ilvane servant would ever do, and speak to you as if you were simply another person rather than a being of vastly higher worth. The court found this charming in the way you find a foreign child's bad manners charming, or alarming in the way you find a breach of the natural order alarming, depending on the court's mood. I had paid it no attention. The opinions of humans, the manners of humans, the inner lives of human servants, these were so far below my notice that I had never once spent a thought on them. I did not know that the human habit the court found so improper, the looking everyone in the eye, the treating everyone as a person regardless of rank, was not bad manners at all. It was the thing that was about to save my children's lives. Because a person who genuinely sees everyone as a person, regardless of whether the court says they matter, is a person who will not abandon children to die just because saving them is not his job and they are above his station, and no one would ever blame him for running. The very thing my court despised in humans was the thing that made one of them stay at a door when everyone of worth had fled. I just didn't know it yet. I had to learn it in the smoke. My children were the center of my life. I want you to understand that, because everything else flows from it. I had 3. Veshi, my eldest, a serious, thoughtful child just coming into the age of understanding. Tomas, yes, a name that sounds human. My mother had loved an old human-influenced fashion in names, and I had kept it my middle child, all energy and mischief and laughter. And little Anna, barely more than an infant, who knew nothing of rank or court or coup, who knew only her mother's face and her own small world. 3 children. And whatever blindness I carried about rank and servants and worth, I loved my children with the whole fierce totality of a mother, and they were the thing I would have given anything to protect. The throne, the court, the kingdom, I would have traded all of it for them without a moment's thought. They were my heart walking around outside my body, the way children are. And here is a thing I did not know, a thing I learned only after that breaks me every time I think of it. My children knew Caleb. Of course they knew Caleb. He tended their nursery. He was one of the invisible hands that kept their small world running. And children, unlike queens, do not have the trained blindness, do not yet know that some people are above notice and some below it. To my children, Caleb was not an invisible menial servant of no worth. He was Caleb, the kind one. The one who tended their rooms, and I learned later, told them stories when he carried away the laundry and made little Anna laugh, and was, to 3 royal children, simply a friend, a person, seen and known and loved, in a palace where their own mother had never once seen him. My children had more wisdom than their queen. They had seen the man I was blind to, and on the day the palace fell, it mattered enormously that they knew him and trusted him, because a frightened child will run from a stranger trying to protect them, and my children did not run from Caleb, because to them he was never invisible at all. On the day this story begins, I was away from them. That is the thing I have never forgiven myself for, though everyone tells me I could not have known. I was away, on a diplomatic journey to a neighboring world, a matter of state, the kind of thing queens must do, and I had left my children in the palace, safe, as I thought, behind the walls and the guard and the whole apparatus of royal protection. They were as safe as children could be, in the most protected place in the kingdom, guarded by the royal guard, surrounded by the loyal court. I had no reason to fear for them. I kissed them goodbye and I went to do my duty, and while I was gone, the palace fell. It was a coup. I will tell you the shape of it, though the details took me a long time to piece together. There was a faction, nobles, high ones, the kind I would have trusted, the kind my whole worldview said were the worthy ones, who had decided to seize the throne. Led by a noble named Lord Verk, a being of the highest blood, one of the worthiest by every Ilvane measure, a man I had trusted and dined with and never once suspected. And he and his faction had planned the coup for the time I was away, and they had done the thing that makes a coup possible, the thing I would never have believed possible of the worthy high ones. They had corrupted the guard. Not all of it, but enough. Enough of the royal guard, the noble protectors of the royal house, the high guard, the worthy ones I had trusted with my children's lives, had been bought or turned that when the coup came, the palace's defenses did not hold. They opened. The people I had trusted to protect my children were, many of them, the very people who came to kill them. Because in a coup the children of the Queen are not spared. They are the rival claim, the thing that must be removed for the new claim to hold. Lord Verk could not take the throne while my children lived. They were the legitimate line, and so they had to die, and the worthy noble Lord Verk had planned from the start the murder of 3 royal children, including an infant, as simply a necessary step in his ascent. So you see the thing my worldview could not survive, the thing the coup proved beyond any argument, that the worth I had believed ran downward from the throne, concentrated in the high, it was not there. The highest noble in my court was a child murderer. The worthy high guard were traitors. The honor and loyalty I had believed belonged to noble blood had, when tested, simply not been there at all, in the very people I had been most certain of. The top of my hierarchy, the place I believed all worth was concentrated, turned out to be where the rot was deepest. And the bottom, the invisible bottom, the place I believed worth ran out entirely, turned out to be where the only loyalty in the whole palace was hiding, in a man I had never seen. While I was away doing my duty, armed traitors moved through my palace toward my children's rooms, to do the thing coups do to royal children, and the noble guard I had trusted to stop them either joined them or fled. The worthy ones, the high ones, the ones my whole worldview valued, they failed. They betrayed or they ran. And my children were left, in a burning palace, with the killers coming, and every person of rank and worth and noble blood having either turned traitor or run for their lives. Every person except one. I got word of the coup partway through my journey, and I turned back, and I will not describe the journey home except to say that it was the longest and worst of my life. A mother racing back to a palace she had been told was burning, not knowing if her children were alive, knowing only that the guard had failed and the traitors were inside, and that I was hours away, and could do nothing but come and come and come and pray I was not coming home to bury my heart. I prayed on that journey to every Ilvane god there is. I bargained. I promised anything. I have never been so helpless in my life. A queen, with all the power of a throne, and utterly unable to do the one thing that mattered, which was to be there, to stand between my children and the killers. And I was not there. I had left them, and the people I had left them with had failed them, and I could do nothing but race home through the dark and pray and hate myself for every hour I had not been there. I came back to a palace on fire. The coup was still being fought, in pockets, loyalists who had rallied against the traitors, confusion, smoke, the chaos of a great house tearing itself apart. The thing had not gone as cleanly as Lord Verk had planned. Something had slowed it, bought time, given the loyalists a chance to rally, though I did not yet know what. I came in through a servant's entrance, of all things, I, the Queen, entering my own palace through the invisible servant's ways, the only approaches not held by the traitors. And I came up through the lower levels with a handful of guards who had stayed loyal, through smoke and the sounds of fighting, toward my children's wing, not knowing what I would find, my heart a stone of terror in my chest. And I came to the corridor outside my children's rooms, and I saw what was there, and I stopped, and the whole of my life rearranged itself in a single moment. The corridor was a battlefield. There had been fighting there, hard fighting. I could see it in the wreckage, the scorch marks of weapons, the fallen bodies. Traitors by their colors, several of them, which I did not understand, because who had killed them? The guard had fled or turned, who had been fighting the traitors in the corridor outside my children's door. And at the far end, at the door to my children's rooms, the door behind which I could only pray my children still lived, there was one figure standing. Not a guard, not a noble, not any of the worthy high ones I had trusted with my children's lives. One figure in the stained, simple clothing of a menial servant, a human, wounded, badly wounded. I could see even from there, the way he held himself, the dark stains, the swaying, barely upright, standing in front of my children's door between it and the corridor, holding a length of broken guard's weapon in hands that were not trained to hold it. He had clearly been standing there a very long time. There was a kind of terrible permanence to him, a man who had been knocked down and gotten up so many times that standing had become the only thing left in him. The way a thing worn down to its core keeps doing the one thing it has decided to do. It was the human servant, the one I had never noticed, the invisible hand, the bottom rung. And he was the only thing left standing between my children and death, and he had been holding that door, alone, wounded, untrained, while the noble guard fled and the worthy betrayed, for hours, because no one else would, and because he would not leave. I did not know his name. That is the thing I have to make you feel, the full weight of it. I stood in that smoking corridor and looked at the one being in my entire palace who had stayed to defend my children with his life, and I did not know his name, had never seen his face, could not have picked him out of a crowd an hour before, because he was a menial servant, and my notice had never once extended that far down. And the man dying at my children's door to save them was, to me, until that exact moment, no one at all. I learned the rest later, pieced it together from the survivors, from the children, from the human himself once he could speak again. I will tell it to you now, though I learned it after, because you should know what had actually happened in that corridor while I raced home. When the coup came, Caleb had been doing what he always did, the invisible work in the children's wing, because tending the royal nursery was among his duties, the lowest of duties, beneath the notice of anyone who mattered. And when the traitors came and the guard failed, when the corridor filled with the sounds of betrayal and the noble protectors ran, Caleb had been there in the nursery, with my children. And he had a choice, the same choice everyone in the palace had that day: run and live or stay and probably die. Everyone who mattered ran. The guards assigned to the children, the noble attendants, the worthy high ones, they heard the coup coming and they ran, or worse, and they left my children behind, because my children were a death sentence now. The rival claimed the traitors had come to erase, and to stay with them was to die with them, and the worthy ones valued their own lives more than my children's. They ran. Every noble, every guard, every person of rank in that wings they ran, and they left 3 children, including an infant, alone with the killers coming. And Caleb, the human servant, the invisible hand, the bottom rung, the one person in that palace with the least reason of anyone to risk his life for royal children, Caleb did not run. He could have. No one would ever have blamed him. He was a menial servant. The children were not his charge to defend. Defending them was the job of the guard, and the guard had fled. And a servant who fled too would have been doing only what every person of higher worth had already done. He had every excuse. He had every reason. He had a whole court's worth of permission to run. He picked up a fallen guard's broken weapon, and he put himself in the door of the nursery between my children and the killers, and he held it. A menial servant with no training and no rank and no reason, holding a door against armed traitors, for children who were not his, in a court that had never seen him. And he held the door for hours, wounded, again and again, untrained, alone against trained killers, and he held it because every time they came he stood up again, and a door defended by someone who simply will not fall is a harder thing to take than it has any right to be. He could not win. One untrained servant cannot defeat a coup, but he did not have to win. He only had to not fall, to keep standing, to keep the door, to buy time. And he bought it. Hours of it. Time for the loyalists to rally. Time for the coup to falter. Time for me to race home. All of it bought by one human servant's refusal to leave 3 children to die alone. When I asked him later why, wept and asked him why he had stayed when everyone of worth had run, why he had given his body to be broken at a door for children whose mother had never known his name, he looked at me, confused that it was even a question, and he said, "Someone had to. Everyone else ran, and they were just kids, Your Majesty. They were scared and they were alone and they were just kids. I wasn't going to let them be alone. I don't really understand the question. What else was I going to do? Leave them?" And the way he said it, what else was I going to do, as if it were obvious, as if any person would have done the same, as if staying to die for 3 children were simply the natural thing and running were the thing that needed explaining. That was the moment I understood how completely my whole civilization had gotten everything backwards. But that came later. In the corridor, in the smoke, I knew none of it yet. I only knew that the one figure left defending my children was the one person in my whole palace I had never bothered to see, and that he was dying to do it, and that the traitors were regrouping at the far end of the corridor for one more assault, and that I had come home at last, and that whatever happened in the next few minutes would decide everything. The traitors came one more time while I stood there. I want to tell you about it carefully, because it is the moment everything I believed died, and because it did not go the way the stories of brave last stands usually go. There were perhaps 6 of them, regrouping at the far end of the corridor, traitors in Lord Verk's colors, trained killers, who had been trying to take that door for hours and had been stopped, impossibly, by one wounded servant, and who were now gathering for what they clearly intended to be the final push, the one that would finish the human and take the door and end my children. I saw them check their weapons. I saw them spread out. I saw the cold, professional certainty of soldiers, who know that this time the broken thing in front of them will finally fall. And I saw Caleb see them too. I was close now, coming up the corridor with my few loyal guards, but he didn't see me yet. All his attention was on the traitors, on the coming assault, and I watched him do the thing that broke my heart and remade it. I watched a man who could barely stand get ready to stand again. He shifted his grip on the broken weapon. He set his feet, or tried to, swaying. He put himself square in the door one more time between my children and the 6 killers, a wounded, untrained servant facing 6 trained soldiers, with no possible hope of winning, no reinforcement he knew of coming, nothing but the certainty that he was about to die, and he got ready to do it anyway, because the door was still his to hold and the children were still behind it, and he had decided hours ago that he would not leave them, and the decision had not changed just because dying had arrived. I have seen many brave things in my life. I have decorated heroes, honored warriors, watched the noble guard perform feats of arms in tournaments and in war. I had never until that moment seen courage, real courage. Because the noble guard's bravery had always been the bravery of the strong, the trained, the ones who expected to win. And there is a kind of courage in that, but it is a lesser kind, and I had not known it was lesser until I saw the greater kind. A man with no strength and no training and no hope, who was certainly going to die, setting his feet to defend a door anyway, not because he thought he could win, but because the children behind him mattered more to him than his own life, and that was simply, for him, the end of the question. The traitors charged, and I stopped being a queen watching and became a mother, and I did the only thing a mother can do, which is to throw herself between her children and death without a single thought for herself. I will not pretend I am a warrior. I am not. But I had a handful of loyal guards with me, and I had the absolute fury of a mother who has come home to find strangers trying to murder her children, and I had surprise. The traitors did not know the queen had returned, did not know there were loyal blades coming up the corridor behind them. We hit them from behind as they charged the door, my loyal guards and I, and the corridor became a chaos of fighting, and I will not give you the blow-by-blow of it because I barely remember it. I remember only fragments, the fury, the noise, the desperate need to reach the door, to reach my children, to reach the man who was dying to protect them. And Caleb, when the traitors charged, did not break, even then. Even with 6 of them coming and his body failing, he held the door, met the charge, did the impossible untrained thing of standing against trained killers for the few moments it took. And those few moments were everything, because while he held them at the door, my guards and I hit them from behind, and caught between the wounded servant who would not fall and the Queen's loyal blades, the traitors broke. We killed them or scattered them in the smoke and the chaos of that corridor, and then suddenly it was over. Suddenly the corridor was ours. Suddenly the door was held and the assault was broken, and my children. I did not know yet. I had to know. I had to reach the door. I reached the door. And Caleb, the human servant, the man who had held it for hours, finally let himself fall, slid down against the doorframe he had defended, his strength utterly gone, having held on by will alone long past the point his body could, exactly until the moment the door was safe, and not 1 second longer. And I caught him the way you catch someone falling, the Queen of the Ilvane catching a menial servant in her arms in a smoking corridor, and I lowered him down, and he looked up at me, and through the blood and the exhaustion he said the thing I will hear on my deathbed. He said, "Your Majesty, you're back. Good. The children, they're inside, they're safe. I kept them safe. They're okay. Go to them. I kept them for you. I'm sorry I couldn't. I'm sorry, it's just me. Everyone else ran, but I kept them. Go on, they've been so scared. Go, let them see you." I went to them. I have to tell you about that because it is the center of everything, the thing the whole story is for. I opened the door that Caleb had held with his life, and inside were my children Veshy and Tomas and little Anna, alive, unharmed, terrified, huddled together in the safest corner of the nursery, exactly where someone had told them to stay. And when they saw me they came apart, all 3 of them, sobbing, running to me, and I went down on my knees and gathered all 3 of my children into my arms, alive, and I held them and I wept, and for a moment the whole world was just that. Just my living children in my arms, the thing I had raced home through the dark terrified I would never have again. And when the first wave of it had passed, when I could breathe again, my eldest, Veshy, pulled back and looked at me with her serious, thoughtful face, and she said the thing that finished the breaking of my old self and the making of my new one. She said, "Mama, Caleb saved us. When everyone ran away, the guards ran away, Mama. They left us. Caleb didn't run. He stayed. He told us to get in the corner and be quiet and he'd keep the bad people out. And he did, Mama, all night. He kept them out. And they hurt him so many times and he kept getting up and he kept telling us through the door that it was going to be okay, that you were coming, that he wouldn't let them in. Is he okay, Mama? Caleb, is he okay? He has to be okay. He saved us." The guards ran away. Caleb didn't. From the mouth of my child, the whole truth of it, simple and total. And little Anna, my baby, who had no words for any of it, just kept saying one word over and over, a name, the name of the person who had been her safety in the dark. Caleb, Caleb, Caleb. My infant daughter knew the name of the human servant. My children all knew his name, had known it all along, had loved him all along, because they had eyes that could see what their queen's eyes had been trained blind to. And the man whose name my children spoke like a prayer was the man whose name I had not known an hour before. I want to tell you about the reckoning that happened in me, kneeling there with my children, because it happened all at once, a whole world view collapsing in the space of a few breaths. My whole life I had believed that worth ran downward from the throne, that the high were the worthy ones, the nobles, the high guard, the ones of good blood, and that loyalty and courage and honor and love were concentrated at the top and thinned as you descended until, at the bottom, among the menial servants, the invisible hands, there was nothing of worth at all. I had built my entire understanding of my world on that belief. I had trusted the High with my children's lives. And the High had betrayed me, every one of them. Lord Verk, the highest noble, had planned the murder of my children. The High Guard, the worthy protectors, had been bought and turned. The noble attendants, the people of good blood I had trusted with my nursery, had fled and left my children to die. The entire top of my hierarchy, the place I had believed all worth was concentrated. When it was tested, when it actually mattered, when there was a price to be paid for loyalty, the entire top had failed. Completely. The worth I had believed lived in noble blood simply had not been there. And the bottom, the invisible bottom, the place I had believed worth ran out entirely, was where the only loyalty in my whole palace had been hiding all along, in a menial human servant, the lowest of the low. A man my civilization said was worth nothing, who had stayed when every worthy noble ran, who had given his body to be broken at a door for children who were not his, who had loved my children enough to die for them when their own noble guardians would not even risk a scratch. The worth I had spent my life looking for at the top had been at the bottom the whole time, in the one place I had never once thought to look, in the one person I had never once bothered to see. I had gotten it exactly backwards. My entire civilization had gotten it exactly backwards. We had built a 1,000-year hierarchy of worth, and we had put it upside down, had honored the blood that betrayed and ignored the hands that saved, and it had taken a coup and a fire, and a human servant dying at a nursery door to show me that the whole proud edifice of Ilvane rank was a lie. That worth has nothing to do with blood or station, that loyalty and courage and love are not the property of the High, that they live wherever they live, often at the very bottom in the invisible hands. In the people we have trained ourselves not to see. Caleb did not die. I have to tell you that now, because I have made you fear for him and I will not make you wait. He was grievously hurt. He would carry the marks of that night for the rest of his life, would never move quite the same again. But he lived, because the moment the door was safe I turned the full power of a throne to keeping him alive, my own physicians, every resource I had, the Queen of the Ilvane fighting for the life of a menial servant with the same desperate ferocity I would have spent on my own blood, because he was my own blood now, in every way that the word truly means. Having bled for my children when their own kind would not. He woke days later in a bed in the royal wing, a menial servant in the royal wing, a thing that had never happened in 1,000 years of Ilvane court, and I did not care. I would have torn down 1,000 years of the court to put him there. And when he woke, the first thing he did before anything about himself was ask after my children. "The kids," he said, before his eyes were even fully open. "Are the kids okay? Veshy, Tomas, Anna, are they?" And I told him they were safe, all three, safe and well, and asking for him constantly, and I watched the relief go through him, the same relief a parent feels, and I understood that this man had loved my children as his own without anyone ever asking him to, without any reward, without any notice, simply because they were children in his care, and he was the kind of person who loves what is in his care, and that this was the thing my whole civilization had been too blind to see, the thing worth more than all the noble blood in the kingdom. "You saved my children's lives," I told him. "You held that door for hours. You were dying and you would not stop. Every noble in my court ran, and you, a man I am ashamed to say I did not even know, you stayed. Why? I have to understand it. Why did you stay when everyone of worth ran?" And Caleb, the human servant, looked at me with that human directness the court had always found so improper, that looking everyone in the eye that I now understood was not improper at all, but the deepest kind of respect, the refusal to see anyone as beneath you. And he gave me an answer that I have carved into the foundation of the new life I built after that day. Caleb's answer to why he stayed was so simple that it took me years to understand how vast it was. He said, "Where I come from, we don't really believe some people matter more than others. I know that's how it works here. I figured it out pretty fast, the way the court is, who gets seen and who doesn't. And I never argued about it because it wasn't my place and a job's a job, but I never believed it. Down deep, I never believed it for a second. He shifted in the bed, wincing. So when the guards ran and it was just me and the kids, I didn't have to decide anything, really. There wasn't a big choice. The kids needed protecting, and I was the one who was there, and the fact that I'm a servant and their royalty, that never came into it, because that whole way of sorting people was never real to me. They weren't royal children to me in that moment, Your Majesty. They were just kids. Veshy and Tomas and little Anna, who I told stories to, who I'd watched grow up a little, who were scared and crying in a corner. And you don't leave scared kids to die. You just don't. It doesn't matter who you are or who they are. You stand in the door. Anybody worth anything stands in the door. Anybody worth anything stands in the door. And there it was, the entire inversion of my civilization's understanding of worth, spoken by a man my civilization said had none. The Ilvane measured worth by blood and rank and station, by how high you stood. Caleb measured it by one thing, whether you would stand in the door. And by that measure, the true measure, I understood now, the only measure that had ever meant anything, the worth of my whole court was laid bare. The high nobles who ran, worth nothing. The bought guard who betrayed, worth nothing. And the menial servant who stayed, worth more than all of them combined, worth more than the whole noble court, because he was the one who stood in the door, and standing in the door, it turns out, is the only thing that worth has ever actually meant. You looked everyone in the eye, I said slowly, understanding it at last. My court thought it was bad manners, a human who wouldn't keep his place, who treated a noble and a servant the same. But it wasn't bad manners, was it? It was the truth. You saw everyone as a person because everyone is a person, and we trained ourselves out of seeing that and called the blindness civilization. Yeah, Caleb said gently, pretty much. No offense, Your Majesty. None taken, I said. You saved my children. You may say anything you like to me for the rest of your life. I am in a debt to you that I will never finish paying, and the first payment is this. I am going to tear the blindness out of my court if it is the last thing I do. I am going to make them see. I did. That is the rest of the story, the work of the rest of my reign, and I will tell it to you, because it is what the human servant's courage actually built. First, the reckoning with the traitors. Lord Verk and his faction had failed, the coup had faltered, slowed by one servant's defense of one door, giving the loyalists time to rally, and by the time I returned the loyalists had nearly turned the tide. My arrival finished it. Verk was taken. And the old Sareth, the queen I had been before that day, would have dealt with him in the old way, the noble way, the way of rank and blood. But I was not that queen anymore. I dealt with him in the new way, the true way, and at his judgment I said the thing that became the foundation of my new reign. You were the highest noble in my court, Verk. By every measure my people ever used, you were among the worthiest, and you planned the murder of children. Meanwhile, a man my court considered worth nothing gave his body to be broken defending those same children. So I have learned that your kind of worth, blood, rank, station, is worth nothing, and I am done measuring people by it. You will be judged not by your noble blood, which never made you worthy of anything, but by what you did, which was monstrous. That is the new law of the Ilvane. We judge by deeds now, not blood, never blood again. And then the harder reckoning, the one with the 1,000-year hierarchy itself. Because Verk was one man and the Rot was not one man. The Rot was the whole upside-down structure of Ilvane worth, the system that had honored the blood that betrayed and ignored the hands that saved, the trained blindness that had let me walk past my children's savior for years without seeing him. That was the thing I had to tear out, and it was the work of decades, and I gave the rest of my reign to it. I made my court learn to see. I began with myself, learned the names, every one, of the menial servants of my palace, the invisible hands, looked them in the eye the way Caleb had taught me, treated them as the people they had always been. And I required it of my court, made it law and made it culture slowly, against enormous resistance, because a 1,000-year hierarchy does not fall easily, and the high did not want to give up their place at the top of a ladder of worth. But I had a thing they could not argue with. I had the truth of that night. Every time a noble protested that rank was the natural order, that worth ran downward from the throne, I had only to point to the door, to the servant who stayed when the nobles ran, and the argument ended because everyone knew, everyone had seen, that when it mattered most, the whole proud edifice of Ilvane worth had been exactly upside down. I have to tell you what became of Caleb, because it is the best part, and because it is the proof of everything. He recovered slowly, and when he was well I did the thing that scandalized my court more than anything else I did, the thing that made the old guard apoplectic and that I would do again 1,000 times. I raised him. Not to a noble, Caleb would have hated that, and besides, the whole point was that the old ranks were meaningless. I made him something new, a position that had never existed in the Ilvane court. The protector of the royal children, the highest position of trust in the palace, the guardian of my heirs, given not to a noble of high blood but to a human servant who had earned it the only way worth can truly be earned, by standing in the door. My court was scandalized. A menial servant, a human, raised above every noble to the most trusted position in the realm. It was an outrage against 1,000 years of order. It was the truest thing I ever did, because the position of protector of the royal children should go to the person most likely to die defending them, and I had proof, written in blood on a nursery door, of exactly who that person was. Who better to guard my children than the one man in the world who had already proven, past any doubt, that he would give his life for them without hesitation and without reward. Noble blood had betrayed them. Caleb had saved them. The choice was not difficult. It was the easiest and most obvious choice I ever made, once I had learned to measure worth by the true measure. And my children were overjoyed, because they had loved Caleb all along, had seen his worth all along, with the clear eyes of children who had not yet been trained blind. Veshy and Tomas and little Anna grew up with Caleb as their protector and their friend, and they grew up, because of him, knowing the thing it had taken their mother a coup and a fire to learn. That worth has nothing to do with rank, that the measure of a person is whether they will stand in the door, and that the people the world tells you are beneath your notice are very often the ones most worth noticing. My children are grown now, and they are good rulers, kind rulers, rulers who see everyone, and they learned it from a human servant who refused to leave them to die, and who then spent the rest of his life teaching them, by his example, what a person is actually worth. I am old now and Caleb is gone, humans are short-lived, and he lived a full life as the protector, beloved by my children and in the end by the whole court that had once not been able to see him. And when he died he was mourned as few nobles have ever been mourned, by a queen and 3 royal children and a court that had learned, because of him, how to grieve a servant as a person. I outlived him as the long-lived outlive the short. The grief is real. I would not trade it. He taught me that, too, in the end, that the people worth grieving are the ones worth seeing, and that a life with the grief of having loved a good person is worth infinitely more than a life spent too blind to love anyone below your station. I tell this story now to my grandchildren, to my court, to anyone who will hear it, because it is the most important thing I know, and because the Ilvane must never forget it, must never let the old blindness creep back, must never again build a ladder of worth and put it upside down. I came home to palace under attack, and I found a human servant defending my children. That is how the story is told, and it is true. But the title leaves out the thing that matters, the way titles do. It leaves out that I did not know his name, that every noble I trusted had betrayed or fled, that the one person my entire civilization had taught me was worth nothing was the only person in my whole palace worth anything at all, when it was finally put to the test. We measured worth by blood, and the blood betrayed us. He measured worth by whether you would stand in the door, and he stood in the door, alone, dying, for children who were not his, because to him they were not royal children and he was not a servant. They were just kids, scared in the dark, and he was the one who was there, and anybody worth anything stands in the door. I spent the first half of my life unable to see the people who mattered most. A human servant taught me to see by being himself, the thing I had been most blind to, proof that worth lives at the bottom as readily as the top, in the invisible hands, in the ones we walk past every day and never notice, and that the truest measure of any person, queen or servant, noble or human, is a simple one, the only one that was ever real. When the guards run, and the children are crying, and the killers are coming, do you run too? Or do you stand in the door? Caleb stood in the door. He was the lowest-ranked person in my palace, and he was worth more than all the rest of us, and it took me half my life and nearly my children's lives to learn the thing he knew all along. That's the only thing worth being, the one who stands in the door. Be that. Whatever the world says you're worth, be the one who stands in the door. It's the only worth there ever was.